That's the last lesson that we had. And I know right now, you know what a pivot table is. And then also, I'm hoping also you know what a pivot table is being used for. So let me project my screen here. Hope my screen is visible from your end.
Yes.
Yeah. So we said last time, a pivot table is used to summarize data. For instance, when you have a large data set like this is a call center data set, and you need to analyze it quickly. Pivot table will really help you to do that. So on how to do that, there are various ways of inserting a pivot table. So the first thing is make sure your data has column headers. I think that is what I said last time. If all your columns do not have headers, or one doesn't have headers, then you want to be able to insert a pivot table. So that is the check number one that you must check before you even think of inserting a pivot table. So currently here, what you're seeing here, I've ensured that all the column headers are there before I can insert the pivot table. So how to insert it, you simply select the data. After selecting the data, you go to the Insert tab, and then you will choose on the pivot table here. And that is the pivot table in a nutshell. So you'll see a blank canvas here on your left. And then to your right, you will see pivot table field list, and it contains your column headers. And to the bottom right here, you will also see these fields, whereby you can drag now these pivot fields into these sections like this. So if you want to know, for instance, maybe the number of calls made by each agent, so you simply take the agent name to the row, and then call ID to the values, and it will aggregate, or it will count all the calls handled by these agents. So that is how easy it is to use a pivot table. So last time also we looked at how you can now do various forms of manipulation using a pivot table. And one of the things that we touched on was a slicer. So I hope you know what a slicer is currently. So what a slicer is used to as a filter. So on your pivot table, here on your bottom right, we have this field or filter. So when I drag a field here on the filters section, let's say call it, for instance. So when I look at my top right here, top left here, you can see this filter has been applied. So if I want to know how many inbound calls were made, I simply select inbound, and I can be able now to see, now these are the inbound calls that were made by these agents. See, so the same thing can be done using slicer. And I showed you how you can use slicers. So for you to do that, simply select one of the cells in the pivot table, go to Analyze, and then navigate to where you see Insert a Slicer. So this window will pop up, and you will select now the field that you want to use. Let's say I want a slicer for call outcome. I simply select on it, click on OK, and this is what we are having. So here you can be able to see the type of call outcomes that we have. We have those calls that were escalated. We had those calls that were follow-ups. We had also calls that were resolved at the first interaction. So when you select these fields this way, for instance, if we want to know how many calls did Alex escalate, we see it's 5 because I've selected here escalated. How many follow-up calls did Brian make? Simply select on follow-up, and you can be able to see the number of follow-up calls that were made by each agent. How many calls were resolved by each agent? Simply select on resolved, and you can be able to see how everything is changing depending on what you have selected. Yeah. So slicers come in handy when you are analyzing data. And for instance, if you want to interact with your data live, so it's good to use the slicers, not the filter here. If you want to say, for instance, when you want to navigate and know how many follow-up calls were there, how many escalations were there, how many calls were resolved, using a slicer is quite efficient. So just to recap that, so you go to Analyze, Insert Slicer, and then let's say, let me select call rating as one of the fields that I want to use as a slicer. So the questions that we are asking ourselves is, how many of these calls had a rating of 5? These are inbound calls. How many of them had a rating of 5? So there were 22 according to what we've selected. So when we include all calls, both inbound and outbound, we can see we had 42 calls that had a rating of 5. Rating of 4, 3, there were 37, 2, there were 33, and 1, there were 21. So you can have your slicers so that you can interact with your data. For instance, whenever you are presenting your report and you want maybe to be show people or your audience the detailed report without you having so many sheets of the same report. You can simply have these slicers, maybe on your right or whichever position or on your left, so that you can just filter at a go like this. So in these slicers, the way they are right now, you can change how they appear. So when I go to options, when I click on the slicer and go to the options field, so you can adjust the column So hope you are seeing what I'm doing currently. So previously, let me just undo this. Previously, you see how these slicers have been arranged, right? For instance, if we want this slicer, we want this value to be distributed evenly, like 2 rows, 2 columns. We have to just select on the slicer, just click on the slicer, go to options, navigate to where you have columns. So columns, you can either increase them or reduce them. So if I want them to be in 2 columns, I'll simply click on increase. That is, I want them to be in 2 columns like this. If I want them to be in 3, I simply increase. And then if I want them to be in 5, I also increase this. You can also adjust the height of your slicer. See what's happening here. You can also increase the width of your slicer as well, like that. So let's do the same with this. Let's increase the columns so that all these are in one row. So that we have this aligned this way. So hope you are wondering why we are doing this. So for instance, if maybe you have so many fields that are taking a lot of space, you have to readjust that slicer. And how you can do that is by reducing or increasing the column like this. So you see now these have been aligned horizontally, all of them. So options. And then apart from that, you can also change the appearance of your slicer. Hope you can see these options that are here. And this section is called the slicer style section. You can change how your slicers look like. So let's use this. Here, let's use this. Options, slicer style, this. Yeah. So any question up to that point? Olivia, Violet, are we on the same page? And also Agnes?
Yes.
Yes.
We're together.
Yeah. So that's how to use slicers in pivot tables. So the other time we had discussed options for sorting. Hope you remember how we sort data in pivot tables. So sorting, you make sure you select one of the cells in the pivot table, and then you right click, and then navigate to where you have sorting. And then you have 2 options, sorting from the smallest to the largest, and also from the largest to the smallest. Let's go with this option. And I also told you how you can select multiple options on your slicers. Do you remember how you can do that, Olivia? Can remind us. How are we doing that?
Mm-hmm. Were we using shift?
I don't know. What do you think? What were we using?
Shift.
Shift, Agnes? What were we using?
Hey, I would say like Olivia, but I don't remember vizuri.
Mhm. Okay, we were using control, not shift. So you simply press on control. You hold on control as you select the various options that you want. So it's not shift, it's control. Sawa.
Sawa.
That's how you can select multiple options whenever you are using slicers. And then I also told you also you can insert a timeline. So timeline works with time periods. So it works the same way like inserting a slicer. So insert that and then timeline. It's analyze and then insert timeline. Let's use call date. So this is the timeline here. This is the timeline. And by default, it comes in form of months if you have dates. So, but look at here on these timelines, you can see we have various options. So we have years, quarters, months, and days. So by default, it's months. But if you want days, you can simply select on days like this. So you can see all the days from Jan 2025 till December have been what? Have been highlighted. So, but let's go with months. So calls that were made in February, they were 124. Calls made in the month of March, they were 126. Hope you are seeing what I'm doing. Calls made in the month of April, simply select on the timeline, April. Select May. May there were 5. June, no calls. July, no calls. These other months, no calls. So it means our calls were from March. And then we had February, we had March, we had April and May. Right? So that's how to do a timeline. And you can also change the styles of your timeline the same way we've done for slicers. So simply click on the timeline, go to options, and then go to where we have timeline styles. So you can select. I think there are quite a number here. If you choose dark, So you can also adjust the height of the timeline, and also you can reduce the height. You can also adjust the width as well. So if you don't want the label of maybe month to be there, you simply unselect here. So when I check on this box, you can see here, month has been highlighted. But if you don't want to see that, you simply uncheck this box. If you don't want to see the header for the timeline, simply unselect it. If you don't want to see the label, unselect. If you don't want to see the scroll bar, again, unselect. But if you want to see the scroll bar, simply select this way. If you want time, select it. If you want the header again, you select it. Same applies to selection label as well. So that is it, how to do a timeline on pivot tables. So another thing that we talked about when we were doing the pivot table is you can always, depending on the type of your data, you can decide on the aggregate measures. And the aggregate measures that we talked about, we had count, we had sum and average. And average. So these were the aggregate measures that we talked about. And how you can adjust that, you can either do it from the pivot table itself or from the value section at your bottom right. So we'll illustrate the two approaches. So from the value section, when you click on it, you will see this window that is popping up. So you'll navigate where we have value field settings, and then you will see all these aggregate functions. We have sum, count, we have averages, we have max, mean, and product. We have also standard deviation, variance, and so on. So those are the options that we have depending on the aggregate measure that you want, or depending on the type of data that you are using. So at the moment, we are just counting the number of calls. So we use count. If we wanted to sum maybe calls, so we might be forced to have a column here that shows the number of calls in numerical terms that each agent handled in a particular day. That's when we can be able to use sum. But what we are having currently is just the call ID. So we are simply counting the call IDs. That's why we've chosen count. So another way of changing the aggregate measure is simply selecting a cell in the pivot table, right clicking again, and then going to the value field settings here. And when you do that, this window will pop up whereby you'll now select if you want an average, if you want a count, or whether you want a sum or even a variance. So we go with count because we were counting the call IDs. So another thing that you have to remember whenever you are using pivot tables is also you can use pivot table charts. You can insert a chart in your pivot tables. So let's see how we can achieve that. So this is let me select all months first. Or I can simply get rid of this first so that we have this. So how do you insert a pivot chart? So the idea is simple here. Simply select one of the cells in the pivot table, then go to analyze. Then in the analyze section, you'll see this optional we have the pivot chart. Click on insert a pivot chart this way, and then click on OK. So we've inserted the pivot chart. It's that simple. So on the pivot chart, you can now manipulate it. So like you can give it a name like this is called a agent. Agent. So those are, I'm just giving it a title, this chart. Then having this pivot chart and having this field section doesn't make it look nice. So we can always get rid of the filters here. And how we can achieve that is simply selecting on the chart and then going to analyze section. Sorry. And then selecting hide all. So we've hidden all filters. So you can change the color of your graphs. We can also manipulate and get rid of maybe the grid lines like this. We can include data labels in the chart so that at a glance, we can be able to know how many calls each agent was handling. So we can edit the axis or axis like that. We can also edit now the labels. We can change, I really change this. Let it be that way. Let us just bold that. Can decide on the font color. We can change the width of the bus. Like this. So the good thing about using a pivot chart is you can interact with it. For instance, if we want now to know the number of calls that were resolved by each agent, and we want to view that graphically. So we simply click here on resolve, and you see the pivot chart will change automatically. When, for instance, you want to know follow-up, you also see the graph is changing automatically as well. And then escalated calls, also this one is changing automatically. So you might even want to narrow down the calls that were maybe escalated and had a rating of 2. Yeah, so those are escalated calls that had a rating of 2. A rating of, let's say 4. Yeah, this one had a rating of 4 as well. So we can interact with your chart, pivot chart, whenever you are working with pivot tables. Any question up to that point on how to work with pivot charts? Meelewa?
Yeah, Fred, mi nimeelewa, lakini kuna mahali nimechanganyikiwa kidogo tu. So
Yes.
we are using this data call type, and you selected the outcome and the call customer rating. So so according to the slicers that you've used, even if you use multiple slides, I mean slicers, you'll still be able to get the pie chart whenever you click on them, even after using multiple slicers.
Yes, you see what I'm doing currently.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what I've selected here, you can see I've selected calls that were escalated.
All
you
right.
see, calls. And then I've come here and selected, let's say, calls that were escalated and had a rating of 1.
Yeah.
You see, it's changing.
Yes.
Yeah. Rating of 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're okay now?
Yes.
Violet and Agnes, are we together?
Yes, Fred, we're together. We're okay.
So that's how you can use a pivot chart. So we'll also just have a dedicated lesson for data visualization, and we will go in depth on graphs and which type of graphs to use and when should you use them. So this was just to show you how you can build a pivot chart when you are working with pivot tables. So I also recall one of the things that we talked about last time is how to change the layout of your report. I think it's also something that we saw. Let me just bring a field list here and take call type or call outcome. We select all of this, escalated. Yes, I told you you can change the layout of your pivot table. And I remember telling you, when you want to change the layout, you simply click one of the cells in the pivot table and go to the design tab. So when you click outside the pivot table, you won't see the design tab. So you must click a cell inside the pivot table for you to be able to see this design tab. So the design tab and analyze tab are there only when you click on a cell inside the pivot table. So when we go to design, you can change the design of your pivot table. So and we have so many options that you can use depending on your preference. So that's how you can change the layout in terms of pivot table styles. Let me go with this. So that is pivot table styles. It's under the design tab. And then you can decide now to have a banded row and banded columns. I don't know whether you're seeing what I'm doing here. So what I've just done, I've changed the layout of the pivot table here. I've just changed the layout. And how I've done that, I've selected a cell inside the pivot table. I've gone to the design tab. And then amongst all these options, I've chosen one option. And this is what I've chosen. And then still under the design tab, under the pivot table style options, you can choose to have banded rows. So look what happens when I unselect banded rows. And when I select, you can also see the effect. So you can see each row is different. That is in terms of color, but still maintaining the same theme. And then when I unselect banded columns, it removes those lines. But when I select banded columns, you see these lines have been added to the pivot table. And then you can also decide on the report layout of your pivot table. So on the report layout, when you click just on this drop down, you see these options that are available. So you can see the first option is show your pivot table in compact form, show your pivot table in outline form, show your pivot table in tabular form. So those are the options that are available, leave alone these ones. So let's say we want tabular form. We have it this way. So I normally go with tabular. It's nice when you are doing reporting. Then I also told you, you can decide whether you want to show the grand totals. So if you want to show the ground totals, you can simply select on these options here. So when I've selected on that option, you don't see any grand total here. So grand totals. And then if you want on for rows and columns, it is the default. Or if you want for rows only, you simply select on rows only. You can see we only have grand totals for the rows alone. If you want to do for maybe columns only, you simply select on columns only. And columns only, you can see now your grand totals here at the bottom. So you can also choose to show headers. Like that. So that's how you can play along with regards to layout of your pivot tables. Are we together up to that point? Or have I lost someone?
Pamoja.
Okay.
So far, so good.
Okay, so someone. So there are times when you are working with pivot tables and don't want to see these filters here. See these filters here. They are not good whenever you are presenting your report to senior people. So if you want to get rid of these filters, just hide them. So you simply select on them, then go to Analyze. You simply click on Hide those fields. Yes. So right now you don't see those filters here. We've hidden them. So your report now looks good. You can always change the default because sometimes you see this is saying count. You simply put a good description here. These are calls per agent. Calls per agent. Like that. So this looks a bit cool and nicer. So you see now how this report is. You can present it to someone. And so I think we've covered extensively on how to analyze data using pivot tables. And I'm sure right now you have idea on how you can utilize them whenever you are doing data analysis. So when you become good in this, you'll be just taking short time whenever you are doing your analysis. So instead of writing complex formulas, you can simply make use of these pivot tables. So unless there is any question regarding pivot table before we close on it. So if there's no question, it means we are good. So let us shift gears a bit and see what else can we do with Excel apart from using pivot tables. So we'll narrow down now to functions that we normally use to whenever we are analyzing our data. So, and we will begin with aggregate functions. So aggregate functions, they help us to summarize data just the way that can be achieved using pivot table. Same can be achieved using Excel formulas as well. So for instance, let's say we wanted to know the number of follow-up calls made by Susan, maybe on a particular day, or simply the number of follow-up calls that were made by Susan, the number of resolved calls, and also the number of calls that were escalated by each of these agents. Same can be achieved without using pivot tables. And how can we do that? By using formulas. Excel formulas and or functions. So we'll begin by simple functions. A function like count. Function like sum. A function like average. The ones that are commonly used, not those complex functions. We have count if. We have counter or count ifs. We have count if and count ifs. Also we have counter. We also have if, sum if. We have average ifs, average ifs, and average if as well. Average if. Some also we have some ifs as well. Some ifs. And we have count. So these are the functions that are mostly used. There is nowhere you go where you won't find these functions being used, and they are applicable everywhere. So this keep them somewhere because they are very important. So yeah, check example. So let us now look. These are aggregate functions, but we've expanded them with the aggregate functions with conditions. Conditions means that you want something, but it should meet a certain criteria. For instance, when I say count if, so count calls only if they are follow-up calls. Some calls only if they are maybe resolved, or if they are maybe escalated calls. Maybe average the same if they meet a certain condition. That's why we have average if. But whenever you hear of average ifs, it means it's multiple criteria. If it's only one criteria, you'll hear of average if. If it's more than one criteria, you'll hear of average ifs. Same applies to count ifs and also the sum ifs. That is more than one condition. So I want to show you today how you can use these formulas. So at the moment, what we want to achieve here is for these agents that we have, we want to know the number of follow-up calls that each one of them made. So for this, I had said earlier, you need to know how your data is structured. So in my data, you can see column A is simply agent ID, then B, agent name, department, that is column C, call ID, column D, call date, column E, and then call time is in column F, and then customer ID, column G, and so on. So when we look at this data, calls comes in as unique. That's why you can see we have each unique call ID for each call. So for this course, for us to be able to know the number of interactions for each agent, we don't have to use the sum. So the aggregate function that we use here is count, because these are text and this is also a string, and we can only count. But if they were values or numbers, we could sum them, and the aggregate function could have changed. We could use sum ifs. But this right now is in terms of text. So we can only count them. So we can say now, if we want to know the call made by each agent, that is the number of calls, we can count on the what? On the call IDs. So here in this sheet, if we want to know the number of calls handled by Susan, we will use the count function. So we'll say is equals to count. Let's just say we want to apply how many conditions? There are two conditions. Condition number one is the agent name. Condition number two is the type of call, whether it was an escalated call, a resolved call, or a follow-up calls. So because we are dealing with more than one condition, we'll have to use count ifs. Remember, if it's only one condition, we use count if alone. But more than one condition, we use count ifs. So I'll say is equals to count ifs. That's the norm of all Excel formulas. They normally begin with an equal sign, then followed by what? Followed by a function. So is equals to count ifs. So we are counting the call IDs. Sorry on this. Is equals to count ifs. So we are counting what? We are counting call IDs here. And I'll teach you the essence of absolute and relative references. So whenever you see me putting a $sign before the column, it means I am locking that column so that it doesn't move. So what I'm simply doing, this is what is called an absolute reference. so that whenever I'm dragging my formulas to fill in the number of calls for other agents, this call ID column will not move. It will simply remain there. And that's why I'm locking it. So we've used count ifs, and we've said what we are counting is we are counting the call IDs. So call IDs. And then let's continue and put another criteria. So I want you guys to take note on the syntax. So the syntax is you begin with the equal sign, then the function, criteria range 1, that is the first criteria, criteria range 2, criteria range 3, criteria range 4. So it depends with the number of criteria that you have or the number of conditions that you want to be met. So let's go to the second condition. The second condition is we want the call outcome. So the call outcome is in column K. So I simply select column K this way, column K. So I'm blocking it using the dollar sign so that it doesn't move. So after doing that, I go back to sheet 1 and click on this. So because I want to drag this across, I'll put a dollar sign just after the letter C. So I want you to see the effect of this. Let me first remove this so that you can understand well. So I've said this. You begin with an equal and then count ifs. Then you go to your data here. On your data, you highlight what you want to count. Let's say, for instance, you want to count the call outcome. So I'll have to select the call outcome column here. That's what I've just done. And then simply, let's say let's close the brackets this way and see whether this can evaluate to something. You see, these are how many calls? These are 177 follow-up calls. But we've only applied only one criteria. So if I want to know the number of resolved calls, I don't have to again repeat this formula here, count ifs. I don't have to do that because I've used a relative reference so that I can get what? I can simply drag this formula across and all the other cells will pick automatically. So simply drag this here. So we know we had 177 follow-up calls. We had 165 resolved calls, and we had 158 calls, which were what? Escalated. So remember, we've just applied one condition, and that is we've counted the number of follow-up calls, resolved calls, and the number of calls that were escalated. We haven't narrowed down per agent at the moment. Any question up to that point? I know this can sound a bit tricky if it's the first time encountering this.
Yes, Fred. So there's a difference between the if and the ifs.
Yes. So the count ifs and the count if you have more than one condition, you can use count ifs. Now, but if it's one condition, you can either use the two, count if and count ifs. But you can't use count if for more than one condition. But you can use count ifs for one condition. But the same does not apply when you are using things like average if or average is and the others, only for counts. So one condition, count if and count ifs can work. More than one condition, we use count ifs function.
Okay, Fred, I have a question. On the count ifs,
Yes.
that's why we have the dollar sign before the letters, you know? And then the count if doesn't have any dollar sign.
So let me just say something here. We have something called relative and absolute references in Excel. Relative and is it absolute? I'm repeating this for your understanding. So absolute reference means whenever you are referring to that cell, all your formulas should refer to that cell alone so that it doesn't move. So for instance, if I'm referring to this cell, this is cell K5. K5. If I want it to only remain intact in that all my formulas are referring to this K5 cell without moving, I'll use a dollar sign. And how will I do that? I'll put a dollar sign before K and before 5. Yeah. That's how I'll do it. I'll use that dollar sign before K, before 5. This is now what is called what? Absolute reference. But K5 alone, when I say K5 alone, this is a relative reference. And what does this mean? If my formulas are referring to this cell and I happen to drag my formulas, it means the reference will be changing. So instead of K5, it will shift to L5, M5, N5, O5, and so on. But if I don't want it to move, I will lock it. And how do I achieve that? I lock it using the dollar signs or the dollar symbol. There are instances where you want only to move across. If you want to move across, like let's say I'm having this cell K5 and I want it to move across, I'll just put a dollar sign before 5 or after K. So that whenever I'm dragging my formulas across, the way I just did here, you can see here cell B, cell, this is cell C13. Whenever I drag the formula, the reference changed. The reference changed to D13 here. And also, the reference changed here to E13, simply because I put a dollar sign after E here and before the number. So if I want this to move across, I'll put a dollar sign before 5, and I'll simply drag my formulas and everything else will pick. If I want to move vertically or I want to move down, now assuming I'm in cell K5, if I want to move down, I'll simply put a dollar sign here before K. I'll put a dollar sign before K like this. So I can drag my formulas downwards this way. This one will allow me to drag my formulas across. See the difference? Look, K5 changing to K6, K6 changing to K7, K7 changing to K8, K8 changing to K9. Here, K5 changing K6, K7 to K8, K8 to K9, and so on. So this is really important for you to know the difference between relative referencing and absolute reference. So if you want your all your formulas to refer to a particular cell without changing, we use the absolute reference. And we use these dollar signs to lock it up so that it doesn't move. If you want to move across, I've told you what to do. And if you want to move vertically, I've also shown you how you can be able to achieve that. Hope I'm now clear. Agnes?
Yes, I've understood.
Yes. So that's how we do it. So let's also see now. This is simply one condition. But now, have we answered the question? We haven't. Because we wanted to know the number of calls made by individual agents here and, and how many of them are falling between these categories. So we need to expand this. We need to take our formula a bit further. And remember one thing, whenever you are separating the formulas, whenever you're putting those conditions, you separate them with a comma so that Excel knows that you are going for the next condition. So I've just put a comma here. And then what am I going to do? I'm going to go to this sheet where I'm having my data. Go to column where we have agent name. And this is column B. And because I don't want this column to move, I do what? I lock it by using the dollar sign this way. Then, after doing that, I put a comma, then come here to where we have now our summary sheet, which is cell B14. I'm highlighting who? Susan. So what Excel will do, it will go in that column, column B, where column B it has what? It has agent names. So it will skim through column B and identify where we have who? Susan. See, so because I want to drag this again, I want to drag this downwards or vertically. I'll have to put a dollar sign here before B. So we have B14, but now I put a dollar sign before it. Now, what Excel will do, it will go to column K, identify where we have follow-up calls. It will go to column B, identify where we have Susan here, and return the number of follow-up calls done by Susan. So Susan has just done 13 follow-up calls. So when we drag this formula here, you see it has picked also for other statuses, that is for resolved calls, and also the calls that have been what? Escalated. Now, if we drag this down, so I don't have now to keep on writing this formula again and again. I simply have to drag this, and because I've used what? I've used relative referencing, it will change. So I've dragged, and each agent you can see the number of follow-up calls made at the moment. So also for the resolved calls and escalated calls, we can do what? Simply drag this so that we have this one filled out for all of these agents. So in total here, this should sum to 177 as to what we had seen the other time. And we can use that by, we can do that by doing a sum. Maybe sum of this cost. Still summing to 177, similar to what we had earlier. So this is total cost. Total costs. This is, so I think this should sum to 500 costs. Now, are we together or am I making things complicated? Hello?
Fred, mimi nimepotea.
I guess
Okay.
I'll have to revisit the recording again.
I know.
Olivia, how are you doing?
Trying to catch up.
Now we are climbing the hill.
Kidogo tu, but we'll be there.
Okay. So this is what I've said. First of all, I just want to give you a secret on how you can master these formulas. Well, the key is not on cramming the formula, please. The key is to understand what do you want. Because when you know what you want, is when now you can apply the formula correctly. And also is when you can also be able to troubleshoot your formula. So you should know what you want to achieve. That is what the end goal. That's step number one. If you don't know the end goal, then there's no need. It means you are just cramming the formula. Or again, understand what each function does. So knowing that, like a function like count if does the count if and or stroke if does the count, understanding what this does, it's also another step. So our understanding at the moment is, we know count if I'm having one condition, I can use count if alone. But if I'm having more than one condition, can use what? The count ifs. That is understanding what each function is doing. Goal number one. What do I want? What I want, number one, is I need to know, for instance, the types of call outcome. I want to know type of call outcome. Simple. That's number one. Because here we are looking at how many follow-up calls, how many resolved calls, how many calls have been escalated. That is task number one. Task number two, how many of these calls were from these agents, the agents that I've highlighted here? How many of these calls, let me use an example of follow-up calls. Of this total of 177 calls that were follow-ups, how many were for Susan? How many were for Mary? How many were for Grace? How many were for Anne? And so on. So that is condition number two. That is call outcome type by agent. Call outcome type by who? Agent. Those two conditions, that is what we want to achieve. Higher. Let us now achieve the outcome number one. The outcome number one is we need to know the follow-up calls, resolved calls, and escalated calls. And we've chosen the right function to use, and that is the count ifs function. Now, how do we do that? We begin by an equal sign, and then the function itself, that is the count ifs function. And then where in this data sheet do we have call outcome? Call outcome is in column K. For your information, it is in column K. We need to highlight the whole of column K. And how do we highlight that? Simply hover around where we have that column K, wait for that down arrow to appear, and then click immediately. You'll see everything here have been highlighted. So where do we want to count this from? Where are we counting from? That's the question. We are counting that from column K. And column K in our case is call outcome. So in this call outcome, we have three categories. That is follow-up, resolved, and escalated. So we want to count now in each category, how many are they? So we'll say, after doing that, remember I said you separate with a comma after highlighting where we want to count from. So, and remember, we don't want this column to move. We want it to remain intact. So we use the dollar sign before we can even go anywhere. We use the dollar sign like this. Then after doing that, we now have to put the condition. Yes, we are counting if in column K, but what are we counting? Are we counting resolved calls? Are we counting follow-up calls? Or are we counting escalated calls? We need to specify. Okay, we've put a comma here. Let's go back to sheet one. We want follow-up. I'll simply click on follow-up like this. and we simply close the bracket. So when I press on enter, it will bring 177 as what? Follow-up calls. That is condition number 1 achieved. Now condition number 2. Remember when we are using count ifs, it means it's multiple criteria. Out of these 177 calls, how many were for Susan? How many were for Mary? How many were for Grace? And how many were for Anne? And the others as well. We need now to come and include another condition. Remember, condition number 1 is met. We go to condition number 2. So condition number 2 is we want to look at the agent. So in our data, agent is in column B. Agent name is column B. We highlight agent name. Put $sign to protect it so that it doesn't move this way. Protecting it. And then remember we separate this with a comma. Then come and highlight the agent here. That is B14. And simply because we want to drag that down, put a $sign before B. And simply hit on enter. So you see, Susan made 13. Follow-up calls. Mary made 14. Grace made 25. And Anne made 23 calls. Yes. So that's why I've said the issue here is not memorizing the formula. The issue here is, do you know what you want to achieve? That's the question. If you know what you want to achieve, then writing the formula becomes easy. Understood? Hello?
Sema bado.
Yeah, kidogo kuna kitatanishi.
You will still go and follow the recording.
Yeah, we will.
Yeah. But I think I've explained it in layman's terms so that you can understand. So I'm not teaching you to cram the formulas of the functions, but simply to understand how to use them. Comprehension is more important than anything else, because when you comprehend, you are able to apply it in life scenarios that you'll encounter. But if you memorize, then you'll be in hot soup. Yes. So you can include as many conditions as possible. You can include as many conditions as you can. So for instance, this calls that these agents have handled. Remember, they are both what? They are both inbound and outbound calls. And that distinction is in column I, where we are having the type of call. Is it an outbound call? Is it an inbound call? Yes. So those are the categories that we do have. So if we want to include those categories, we can simply come here and add them. But we'll have to come to column I this way, and and do what? Highlight that we are counting what? Inbound calls. Inbound calls. This way. This one. I'm looking for call type. Yeah. And then put inbound. So you see now for Susan, out of the 13 calls she made, 8 were inbound. Yes, 8 were for inbound. The rest you can see the number of inbound calls that they made under each of these categories. Yeah, so that is it with regards to how we use the count ifs. So I know it might be daunting at first, but once you get used to this, you'll be doing it very fast. Yeah, hope you've understood up to that point, because I want to end this session here.
Understood.
Yes. So today's lesson, we had a recap of how to use the pivot tables, and now we are now in depth now starting to apply the Excel functions that are commonly used in data analysis. So brace yourself. This won't be easy, but I'll try my level best to explain each concept and break it down so that you can be able to understand. So I'll pick from this point tomorrow. I think we'll start on this function, the count ifs functions, as we go on to other functions as well. At this juncture, I just give you room to to ask a question, give a comment before we enter the class. We'll start with Olivia, then Violet.
Nothing from my end. I think I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you, Fred, for today's lesson.
Okay, sawa sawa.